Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I have myself and my fearless leader here, VJ, we're going to be covering the topic of life in a day of an automation first organization. So before we jump in and get started, I would love for VJ to introduce himself.
Hey, good day, everyone. This is Vijay Chobolu. I actually head the hybrid cloud practice for North America Consulting. My team is actually responsible for subject matter expertise and thought leadership in infrastructure automation and management space across Red Hat products and portfolio of technologies. I actually have 25 years in the industry, worked in different roles, both from being a database administrator to a technology leader within a data center to now being a part of a consulting organization, kind of driving a team of experts. I'll actually hand it off to Walter Bentley, who is my automation lead, focused on driving automation with our customers.
Thank you for that, sir. Before we get started, fun fact is I met VJ for the first time at a Red Hat Summit, and he recruited me from there. So I'm ever in his debt. But as mentioned before, my name is Walter Bentley. I'm a senior manager here over the automation practice that covers here in North America, so part of Red Hat Consulting. And I have about over 20 years of IT experience. I've worked for quite a few different verticals, but the technology one has been the most fun and exciting, of course. Thank you for being here and then kind of listening to what we have to present today. We're going to jump into some very quick talking points, just so everyone knows kind of what we're going to cover today. This is very much going to be a conversation between me and VJ, so we're not going to PowerPoint you to death. But we do have some very key, important points we want to share with you, and we're going to make sure do our best to present them to you. So the first one we're going to jump into is why think automation first. And with that being said, I'm going to hand off to VJ to kind of start the discussion around that.
I think that's an important question. Why do you want to actually have an automation first strategy in an organization? Automation is key to actually get away with menial tasks that are actually mundane or things that you actually repeat, so that you actually can have your teams focus on important things and focus on strategy that actually would add impact and value to the business. Going back to 2019, early 2020, automation was still a big part of everyone's mind. And then we got the pandemic. Fast forward to 2021, we are actually living in a brand new world, and we actually have to live with new ways of working. What the pandemic has shown us is that we actually have to be agile to the changing needs of the market, because we have to figure out how to align the organization to be faster and more nimble. How do we actually scale the needs of the organization quickly? As you've seen organizations change their complete supply chain, you actually have the likes of retail industry that are actually gone from selling stuff in stores to completely switching to online selling. They actually had to change that whole business model, which means they actually had to change how they actually did things, how they actually scaled their organization, and multiply the capacity they needed to actually drive those solutions. Most of the workforce today is actually working remote, which means the workforce actually has to start communicating and collaborating virtually. You no longer have those water cooler talks. You have to find ways to actually communicate and collaborate and actually get things done, which means you have to find ways to accelerate time to value. As you actually look at building new ways of doing things, you actually have to figure out ways to be reliable, because you no longer have people in the data center turning those knobs and switches. You actually have people remote. You actually have a reliable environment and a platform and automation capabilities that actually can get things to you the way you want them. You want everything still to be compliant as you're actually building and delivering value to your business. But at the same time, you still have budget pressures. You actually have to increase the ROI on your investments, and you are always forced to reduce your OpEx costs. So I think all of the business benefits of actually driving an adoption first mindset, you actually can see them here. But that's an interesting thing. Like, everybody is now forced to look at automation first and figure out how to get things faster, better, and safer. But how do we actually go about? Walter, can you actually walk us through some of the things that you might recommend?
Sure, and thank you. That was actually a perfect handoff. Now that we kind of set the foundation there, and you know, when BJ and I kind of sat down and really thought through this topic, you know, we came up with some very high level things that, from an organizational standpoint, and even more deeply from a cultural standpoint, as BJ already alluded to, that the changes that you can make within your organization to really kind of embody that automation first type of feel. One of the first things that we kind of roundtabled and talked about is, well, what about the idea of having a chief automation officer? And I know that that sounds very futuristic, and even almost unheard of, right? But imagine being able to introduce someone in your organization where their role is focused solely on how automation is adopted and structured and strategized within your organization. And while that doesn't necessarily mean have to be an executive level type of position, you know, we want you to embody the idea of being able to have an evangelist or appoint an evangelist in your organization that will take automation and make it a priority for them. And then be able to take those standards and behaviors and kind of permeate them down to the other teams. The other thought that we would love to also address and put out into the world is the idea of having a community of practice. And you may say to yourself, well, what is a community of practice? Well, community of practice is basically being able to create for lack of a better word, a team of people or a group, right, that gets together and consider it to be a safe place for people to be able to come in and consume automation content, share ideas, and also be able to help set standards for your enterprise. And over time, the whole idea around that is that if you create a starting zone or a starting space for people who are new to automation, and you give them something to start from, over time, they will get to the point where they'll be able to contribute things back into your community of practice for others to be able to consume. And it creates an environment where you are now crowd sharing ideas and thoughts, as well as you are sharing content, right? Instead of it being siloed off from one organization to another. And so that's one thing that we always encourage our customers to do. This is something we do here at Red Hat, so we wanted to share that with you here. One of the last things we talked about is automation patterns and blueprints. And basically what that is basically crafting an automation strategy, actually physically creating an automation strategy that you are going to use within your enterprise organization, and create it in a way as if it was doing enterprise architecture, where you would have it actually documented as to how you're going to do automation, what are some of the best practices you're going to follow, how are you going to handle authentication and authorization, how are you going to handle security, you know, really write those things down and have that in a strategy. And as you go forward and create content, you're going to find a need to be able to update that. Please do that, right? Treat it as a living document. And as you realize that, you'll be able to actually go forward and take that strategy to organizations that are not doing automation yet, and they're going to get much value from that. So those are just some of the high-level organizational changes that we talked about as we kind of discussed it, and we wanted to share with you today.
So Walter, I think all of that is great, right? From an organization standpoint, you set up your chief automation officer, you've created a community of practice, you've created a space for people to come in, and you also defined an automation strategy. But how do you actually think about automation differently? Like, what is different that we actually would advise our audience that they should be focused on?
Right. So, you know, there were three different areas that we hit on, you know, how you should plan your automation differently. And I know that, you know, the knee-jerk reaction around that is, you know, well, why should I have to change how I look at automation? And I'm not saying you have to, but what we're saying is that if you look at it from a different light or from a different angle, so to speak, we feel that your results are going to be much more successful. The first one that we wanted to put out there is focusing on outcome-based automation and not just looking at tools and techniques. And what that embodies, in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to look at the outcome-based automation, you need to analyze what are your organizational and business drivers, and then interlace that with some of the core principles that you see here on the screen. What are the core automation objectives? What is the quality of service? How are you going to handle access control? You know, from a networking perspective, from a platform perspective, you need to kind of bake all of those those personas or all those behaviors into what your outcome is going to be. And as I mentioned before, you have to always have organizational drivers in there. Some of those could be just, being able to handle things from a tactical standpoint. You don't no longer want to do these mundane manual tasks, or you want to consolidate and make something, improve on something. And then you have to interlace that with your business drivers. Well, what is your core business objective, right? And be able to focus your automation around that versus focus your business objectives around automation, right? It should be the other way around. Anything you automate should be driving towards benefiting your business objectives for your organization in some way. And then, of course, looking at how we can optimize, operational behaviors, and also reduce cost of ownership, right, of your automation platform are really important. So the idea here is start with end approaches, right? Think of what you want from an automation perspective as futuristic as possible. And then based off of that, start crafting how you're going to go about, setting up your automation. And one thing I want to always, leave you with is, as well as prioritize outcomes based off of business value and not just the tactical input, impact per se, right? You want to be able to, again, tie your business objectives. What are you doing as an organization and how you're driving that organization forward? You want to tie those objectives to how you're doing your automation and what you're automating. The other one that, to me seems so self-explanatory, but at the same time, a lot of times is overlooked is demonstrating the value of the outcome, right? So as you're going off and creating your automation and being able to show the benefits that you're driving to the business, you want to be able to demonstrate that. And when I mean demonstrate that, I mean demo it, right? You want to present that to your stakeholders, right? You want to do that. That's something you want to do often. You don't need to wait to the end when you think it's absolutely perfect to be able to demo that for people. And the reason for that is that the more often you display it and be able to demo it to people, you can get that continuous acceptance. You may be able to pivot if needed. You may be able to improve on it the next iteration in certain ways. But without that input and without that inclusiveness, right, that you're bringing those stakeholders in, sometimes it can get very difficult to be able to show the value at the end because it's taken you so long to get to that end state. And then the last one, which, is something that is said over and over again, if anyone does any sort of agile development, which is, drive your roadmaps in smaller releases and sprints. And what we're saying is that by driving your roadmaps to smaller releases and sprints, you will have quicker time to value, right? You will be able to see the benefits of the value that you've added there from an automation perspective faster. And even though we always want to solve for the huge, we always want to solve for the huge tactical problem. Instead of going after the huge problem, try and take it off in smaller chunks. And that way, as you complete that, you're able to launch that into production, so to speak, and you're able to get the value from that as you move on to the next smaller chunk and the next smaller chunk, right? So the incremental value that you'll be increasing on over time is the last thought that we wanted to add in there. BJ, I would love for you to add any context in here if you think I overlooked something, which I'm sure I have.
No, I think one thing I'll probably say is the focus on value, focus on being able to measure that value for feedback and being able to share that quickly so that you actually can fail fast and kind of course correct yourself is actually a huge key for success of not just automation, but for any large engagement that any enterprise actually picks up, right? So now that we actually have the focus, right, as to what you should actually focus on, is there an approach or a framework that you actually would recommend to drive this automation strategy? Because we've discussed the need for automation. We've discussed the focus areas for automation as to how to focus on what benefits the organization. Is there an approach that you actually would recommend that would actually benefit setting an automation strategy?
Yes, absolutely. And again, you're setting me up perfectly to kind of talk about an area that, we speak a lot about internally here at Red Hat. And as we've learned over time, we wanted to share it with our customers in more of a broader way. And what you're seeing on the screen here is something that's taken from the Open Practice Library, and that's available out there for anyone to be able to contribute to and consume. It's an open source means of doing agile development. And the loop here is called the Mobius loop. And it's a framework that we've helped that we use to help to deliver business outcomes faster. Right. And the whole idea around this is that the foundation line is the key differentiator, right? It is a layer that really covers culture and technical practices, right? So we're moving outside of just looking at the actual tool, but now moving into talking about, well, how can we make cultural and also other technical practices and combine those together? It plays an irreplaceable role, right? And when it comes to transformation inside of making cultural changes in your organization, it does the practice of being able to pair technology with culture, right? And what we've come to realize is that by doing that, it's a catalyst for accelerating of those outcomes, right? So that's the key is pairing technology with culture is really the catalyst. It's the thing that's going to move that thing forward a lot faster in an accelerated fashion. And so by doing iterative planning and executing, right, kind of embodying the things we've covered already, right, by focusing on, you're starting at the beginning of the Mobius loop in the Discover section, by focusing on the outcome-based automation use cases, knowing that the whole time, the foundation that you have to always cover is tying your business objectives to your use cases. And then as you're going through, once you've done that discovery and decided on what you're going to automate, while you're going in and actually crafting the content to do that, you need to keep in your mind these things such as integration and orchestration and automation. And you may say, well, if I'm doing automation, I'm already doing orchestration. Well, that's actually not the case per se, right? Orchestration is the idea of being able to tie together multiple automation components, right, to kind of create an end-to-end workflow. So as you're going off and creating that content, think of it in a way where how can you tie this task that you're automating to another task, which could then give an end user kind of an end-to-end workflow feel. You also want to always tie analytics to it, right? And when it comes to automation, analytics may not always be top of mind, but you need to be able to measure, what is the impact of that automation that you've created, whether it be a success or whether it be, are people having issues? Do you need to go in and look at debugging something or fixing a job that is failing, right? You need to tie analytics to what you're doing to really get the determine what the true value is that you received out of creating that automation. And then the last one is you always want to try to ease access to your automation that you're creating by creating self-service options, self-service portals, right, where you're enabling the user to be able to go in, kind of very similar if you were going into any cloud platform where you would be able to click what you want, hit execute, and it would go off and execute that automation. Spoiler alert, Ansible Automation Platform is going to be some great tools to be able to enable you to be able to do that self-service option a lot easier, and that's coming soon.
Yeah, I think I actually definitely like this slide because the way the Mobius loop is structured, it actually tells you that it's a never-ending process. It is iteratively getting better. It is continuous discovery, continuous automation, and continuous improvement, right? So what it's telling us is your optimization, your automation never ends. It just keeps getting bigger and better, and you actually will be able to solve more complex problems as you actually go through this process iteratively. Walter, will you be able to tell our audience, based on your conversation with customers, you actually have hundreds of conversations over the last few years, you've been with me, about what are the different phases of adoption and how do you actually look at where the customer is and figure out what their focus should be and how they actually can grow within the organization?
Cool, absolutely. And I want to say that before I jump into it, that it's because automation doesn't have a wrong or a right? There never really is a wrong or right as to determining where you are in your automation journey or where you are in phases of adopting automation in your enterprise. But what I will say is that we've realized that there's 3 different phases or core phases that you will fit into as you're going and embarking on your automation journey. And by no means do any of these phases lesser than the other. It's just more kind of helps you determine where you are in an automation maturity as far as your organization, as well as kind of gives you a roadmap as to what you should be going to next. And I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time here talking about it, but I do want to just kind of really touch on these three areas. And so we kind of categorized, the first step as accelerate, right? That's usually organizations that are at the beginning phases of doing automation. They're very focused on specific tactical tasks that they want to automate. They're trying to get into a repeatable model, right? Where they're trying to create things that create automation so that they don't have to keep redundantly doing things over and over again. And or their organization has decided that we need to modernize, right? We need to use automation to be able to compete with our business competitors, so to speak. So that's the acceleration phase. And what you're trying to do there is gain for efficiency. In every organization, that is the primary focus at the beginning, right? Is how can I be more efficient by leveraging automation? But what some organizations fail to realize is that once you get that step down, right, and become efficient, there is another step that you need to take really to drive adoption. And that's the orchestrate, right? That's when you move into the point where you're now moving away from just looking at efficiency, but now you want to look at how can I make our systems more reliable? And this is where you're focusing on workflows, focusing on how do I involve multiple teams, right? You're really now looking at your standardization and your governance process around automation. And you're looking at now more of a enterprise automation scope, right? You're looking at how can automation affect my entire enterprise at that point. And that's the next step after accelerate. That's the step that you have to, I think that a lot of organizations now need to be yearning and looking towards next. And I definitely know that by talking to our customers, that's the route that many customers are heading towards right now. But we don't want you to stop there. We want you to take the last and final step, which we would consider to be where now you're at the point where you're ready to innovate, right? You're no longer doing automation to just be effective or to be reliable. Now you're using it to give you that competitive edge, right? You're using that to help you step up above your competitors. And that's where that automation first culture is there. That's where your business impact focus is there. And so, and also taking the time to relook at some of the workflows you have in place and looking for ways where you can optimize it. So at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're pushing our customers and encouraging them to head towards that innovate step, and hopefully, we would love to work with anyone to be able to get them there.
Thanks, Walter. So I think that is actually a great summary of the different phases of automation adoption for our customers. So if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to Walter and I, or you actually can reach out to your Red Hat contacts to have us come in and help you kind of drive the automation journey. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you next year at Ansible Fest 2022. Thank you. Have a good day.